Charcuterie boards are pretty cool, right? You know what's cooler? A party platter. Do you know why they're cooler? Well, one, I get to make it on my wood lathe. Two, I don't have to hear my wife call this a coochie board anymore. I don't know why. In today's piece, I'm going to be using these offcuts of old cherry and maple from previous projects. I'm going to get these all milled up so we can start setting this blank up. These offcuts have been in my scrap wood bin for quite a while now, so I'm going to be putting 2 flat and square edges on everything first. I will then need to cut all of these into 1 inch by 7/8 of an inch stock on the table saw. I can then set the blade at a 30-degree angle to start cutting the stock into the hexagon shapes, making sure to keep the 1 inch side against the tabletop. Once I'm finished on the table saw, I will cut all of the stock into 4-inch long pieces at the miter station. Now I can start setting up the blank mold. Adding packing tape to the bottom of the mold will keep the resin from sticking to it. I've received a lot of comments and questions about why I use a pressure pot and not a vacuum chamber for the resin in my previous videos. I'm not going to use a pressure pot in this video and show you all why I do prefer to use one. Using a straight edge to align the first row of blocks will give me a reference point for all the rest of the pieces. I'm using 3/16 of an inch spacers to align all of the blocks in this blank. I feel it is important to pay attention to the grain direction when laying out these pieces, trying to create some consistency or a pattern with the grain. It's one of those things that probably doesn't pop out at you if it's done, but would stand out like a sore thumb if it wasn't. It's the little things that make the final piece look great. I'm always a bit nervous that a block will come loose and float up in the resin once it's poured, so I like to make this lattice pattern on top of the blank for extra support of all the pieces. It may not be a needed step, but it gives me peace of mind that everything will stay lined up properly. These cardboard tubes that they sell at hardware stores for pouring concrete footings work great for molds. They can vary by about an inch from their designated size for shipping reasons, and that means that you can usually find one that is the exact diameter that you need. Being colorblind makes the color decisions very interesting for me. I wanted to try out a purple color, and since all the different purples look the exact same color to me, I chose by the name. I went with Sunfire Violet from Eye Candy Pigments. Sunfire just sounded cool and sold me on this specific color. Once the epoxy is good and mixed, I can degas it in the vacuum chamber. I probably spent 15 to 20 minutes opening and closing this valve. It gets kinda tedious. Now I know there are a few different ways to do this to try to cut down on the bubbles. I could have stabilized all the wood blocks first. I could have put a coat of epoxy on all of the wood blocks first. These are all good options, but add days to the process. By the way, I use the same chamber regardless of whether I'm using it for pressure or vacuum. I just switch the lids out. Using a vacuum chamber only removes the air from the resin. Pouring it into the mold then adds more bubbles into it. There is also air inside the wood. When using a pressure pot, all of this is irrelevant because it squeezes all of the bubbles in the resin down to smaller than the eye can see. Okay, it's been 7 days. The resin's fully cured. We got some problems. There's lots of bubbles in the top here. This is the main reason why I prefer to use a pressure pot. It's been pretty cold, so the resin took quite a while to cure. Hopefully that means all of the bubbles have risen up to this end of the piece. This is going to be the bottom of the piece, and I'm going to need to cut a tenon here. So I'm going to be removing the majority of all of this area where the bubbles are, so I'm not too concerned. If there's bubbles in the middle, we're gonna have to tackle that when we get to it. I'm hoping there won't be. I don't have a lot of confidence. We'll see what happens. Today I'll be using some new carbide tools provided to me by Simple Woodturning Tools. The Simple Rougher and Simple Scraper both have negative rate carbide inserts that work great when turning resin. These tools are made in the USA, which is unfortunately getting harder and harder to find. There is a product link and a limited time coupon code in the description. I highly recommend you check out all their tools and products and help support an American business. I usually don't know exactly what I'm going to make at the start of a turning project. I found for me personally, I find great pleasure in just going with it and letting the piece take form as I go. If I try to make something very specific, it oftentimes comes out oddly shaped or out of proportion for some reason. I've never really considered myself an artist, and I've always found great pleasure in trying to obtain precision tolerances in all of my woodworking projects, but wood turning is different. It's been a steep learning curve for me, but I feel I'm starting to get the hang of it. I know it may sound corny, but just stepping back and looking at the piece spinning on the lathe, deciding to take a little off here or a bunch off there, and just letting the piece speak to me and take shape gives me a great feeling of peace and enjoyment. One of the things I really like about turning is figuring out how you're going to grip the piece. I prefer to cut a tenon on the bottom of the piece instead of a mortise. I feel this is a significantly safer way to do it. Clamping down on the wood just seems to be better than putting the chuck inside of the piece and expanding it. It definitely creates more waste and more work to remove the tenon at the end, but I think that is a good trade to not get hit in the face with a giant piece of wooden resin. I guess that this video proves that you can use a slow curing resin in a turning piece without using a pressure pot, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's definitely asking for problems, and I will not be doing this ever again. I've recently purchased a new pot that exceeds the capacity of my lathe, so I will be able to create larger and more exciting pieces in the future, while still being able to use my old one to hopefully double up on the projects. Waiting for the resin to cure creates a lot of downtime, so having two pots is going to be great. say thank you to Simple Woodturning Tools for providing the tools I used in this video. You can just feel the quality of these tools when you hold them in your hand, and they really did work amazing. I was actually pretty surprised by how few air bubbles there were in this piece. I was honestly expecting more. I definitely made a mistake here using the clear CA glue. I should have used the black. It would have fit in perfectly, and I doubt I would have been able to see it in the finished piece. Again, this is the reason I use the pressure pot while the resin is curing. None of these bubbles would have even been visible if the resin had cured under pressure. I think I found the finishing process that works best for me so far. I sand with 120 to 1000 grit. The finishing process of a piece with resin in it is way more in depth than if it were just wood. I stop and sand against the grain with every grit, basically creating a crosshatch pattern. I also clean with alcohol between each grit. I add raw linseed oil starting at 400 and use it to wet sand the piece to 1000. Original and microfine Yorkshire turning paste work great to prepare the piece for the polishing and buffing wheel. This is definitely a time-consuming process, but is the best way I've found to remove all of the scratches from the resin and give it that glass-like finish. I'm very happy with how this piece turned out, and hopefully I don't have to sleep out in the shop if my wife doesn't like that joke at the beginning of the video. At least I have a small space heater out here now. Hopefully it won't be too bad. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a great day.